A farmer stood up for a homeless veteran against town bullies, but the next day, Navy SEALs surrounded the local diner for an unexpected reason. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning frost crunched beneath Jack Wilson's worn boots as he made his way across the field toward his barn. The crisp October air bit at his cheeks, turning them a ruddy red that matched the maple leaves scattered across his property. At 62, Jack still moved with the deliberate strength of a man who'd spent his life working the land, though the arthritis in his hands had been getting worse with each passing season. He'd been up since 4:30 a.m., same as every day for the past 40 years since he'd taken over the family farm after his father passed. Some habits never changed, regardless of whether the crops or livestock demanded such an early rise. This morning, like most mornings lately, he'd woken from dreams of Sarah. Even after 3 years, he still reached for her side of the bed before remembering she was gone. Jack was checking the fence line at the edge of his property when he spotted the figure huddled against the large oak tree that marked the boundary between his farm and the main road. The man sat motionless, his back against the trunk, knees pulled up to his chest, despite the cold. A small duffel bag lay beside him. "Hey there," Jack called out, approaching cautiously. "You all right?" The man's head jerked up, eyes suddenly alert. Jack recognized the look immediately. The hypervigilance, the quick assessment of threat level, the subtle shift in posture that prepared for either fight or flight. He'd seen it in his brother when he returned from Vietnam, and in his own son after his second tour in Afghanistan. "Didn't mean to startle you," Jack said, slowing his approach and keeping his hands visible. "Just checking if you need any help." The man was older than Jack had initially thought, probably in his 50s, with a salt and pepper beard and weather-beaten skin. His clothes were worn but clean, and though he was clearly exhausted, there was a dignity in the way he straightened his shoulders. "I'm fine, sir," the man replied, his voice hoarse but steady. "Just resting a bit before moving on. I'll be off your property shortly." Jack nodded, taking in the man's military-style boots and the way he'd positioned himself with clear sightlines in all directions. "You served?" A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face before he nodded. "Yes, sir. Marine Corps, 20 years. My son was Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan." Jack extended his hand. "Jack Wilson." After a moment's hesitation, the man took it. His grip was firm despite the slight tremor. "Michael Reeves, Staff Sergeant, retired." Jack noticed Michael's eyes dart toward the road as a truck rumbled past, his body tensing slightly. "When's the last time you ate, Staff Sergeant?" Jack asked. Michael's gaze returned to Jack, pride warring with hunger in his eyes. "Had some jerky yesterday." Jack nodded, decision made. "Well, I was just about to have breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs and bacon. More than enough for 2. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't take handouts," Michael said, beginning to rise. "Not a handout," Jack replied firmly. "Just breakfast. One vet to another. My brother would kick my ass from beyond if I let a Marine go hungry on my land." A ghost of a smile crossed Michael's face. "You serve?" "National Guard. Nothing heroic. My brother was the real deal. 3 tours in Nam." Jack gestured toward the farmhouse. "Come on. Food's getting cold." After a moment's consideration, Michael picked up his duffel bag and fell into step beside Jack. They walked in comfortable silence back to the farmhouse, a 2-story white clapboard structure that had stood on this land since Jack's grandfather built it in 1937. In the kitchen, Jack went about making breakfast while Michael sat awkwardly at the worn wooden table, his duffel bag between his feet. The warm smell of bacon and coffee filled the small space. "You passing through or planning to stay in Riverdale for a bit?" Jack asked, as he cracked eggs into a cast-iron skillet. Michael's shoulders tensed slightly. "Not sure yet. Was hoping to find some work. Maybe stay a while if I can." Jack nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. He'd seen enough homeless vets over the years to recognize the signs. The careful way Michael spoke about his plans, the way he kept his bag close, the mix of pride and uncertainty in his voice. Town's got some opportunities. Might be tougher this time of year with winter coming, but Pete at the hardware store sometimes needs help. Old man Jenkins at the auto shop too, if you know your way around an engine. I can fix most anything with an engine, Michael said, a hint of pride in his voice. Was a mechanic in the Corps before I... He trailed off, eyes distant for a moment before refocusing. Got good hands for it. Jack set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Michael, along with a steaming mug of coffee. Eat up. Food always helps with thinking. Michael hesitated just a moment before picking up his fork. Jack pretended not to notice how the man forced himself to eat slowly, with dignity, when his eyes said he wanted to devour the food in seconds. As they ate, Jack observed his guest. Beneath the weariness and the slight tremor in his left hand, he could see the Marine that Michael had once been, back straight, movements efficient, eyes constantly assessing. But there was something else too, a wariness that went beyond normal caution. You run into any trouble in town? Jack asked casually, refilling Michael's coffee cup. Michael's hesitation told Jack everything he needed to know. Nothing I can't handle, Michael finally said. Jack had lived in Riverdale his entire life. He knew its virtues and its flaws intimately. The town had always been tight-knit, sometimes to a fault. Strangers weren't always welcome, especially those who didn't fit the town's image of itself. And in recent years, a certain element had grown bolder. Men like Bradley Thompson and his friends, who'd inherited money and businesses, but none of the decency of their parents' generation. Wouldn't happen to be Bradley Thompson and his cronies, would it? Jack asked. The surprise on Michael's face confirmed Jack's suspicion. They caught me sleeping in the park yesterday, Michael admitted. Suggested I move on before they called the sheriff. Nothing physical, just unwelcoming. Jack snorted. Brad Thompson's grandfather would roll over in his grave if he could see what that boy's become. Used to be a time when this town respected those who served. Most places are the same now, Michael said with a shrug that failed to mask the hurt beneath. People see a homeless vet and think we're all just broken or dangerous. Easier to want us gone than to remember we were the ones they sent to fight. The bitter truth of those words hung in the kitchen's warm air. Jack felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same anger he'd felt when his son had come home to far fewer opportunities than he'd been promised. The same anger he'd felt when his brother had struggled for years after Vietnam with minimal support. You got plans for today? Jack asked. Michael tensed again, clearly expecting to be sent on his way now that breakfast was done. Thought I'd try the hardware store you mentioned, see if they need help. Jack nodded, making a decision. I could use some help myself, actually. Got a fence that needs mending on the north pasture, and these old hands aren't what they used to be. It's a day's work, maybe two. Got a clean bed in the spare room and 3 meals a day until it's done. Pride and suspicion battled in Michael's expression. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I know enough, Jack said simply. I know you served our country. I know you're down on your luck but still have your dignity. And I know I need help with that fence. He paused. It's work, not charity. You'd be earning your keep. Michael studied Jack's face, looking for the catch, the hidden motive. Finally, he nodded once, a sharp military gesture. Thank you. I accept. Jack stood, carrying their plates to the sink. Good. We'll head into town first, though. Need some supplies from the hardware store. You can ride along. As they drove into Riverdale in Jack's old pickup truck, he could sense Michael's increasing tension. The Marine sat straighter, his eyes constantly scanning, hands resting too still on his thighs. The posture of a man preparing for conflict. Riverdale was a small town, just over 5,000 people, with a main street straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. They passed the town square with its gazebo and veterans memorial, the library with its Greek revival columns, and a row of small businesses leading to Thompson's Hardware, the largest store in town. Jack parked directly in front of the hardware store, ignoring the glares from Bradley Thompson and two of his friends who were standing outside. Brad was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his family's wealth evident in his expensive clothes and the new Cadillac Escalade parked nearby. "Well, look who's back," Brad called out as Jack and Michael exited the truck. "Thought we told you to move along, homeless guy." Jack stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Michael. "He's with me, Brad, and he has a name. Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves, United States Marine Corps." Brad smirked, exchanging glances with his buddies. "Didn't know you were running a shelter for strays now, Jack." Jack felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "Michael's helping me with some work around the farm, and I'd appreciate if you'd show a veteran some respect." Brad laughed, the sound hollow and mean. "Veteran? Could be anyone claiming that these days. Got any proof?" Michael remained silent, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance, body rigid with the effort of restraint. Jack recognized the look. A man forcing himself not to react, not to make things worse. "He doesn't need to prove anything to you, Brad," Jack said, stepping closer to the younger man. Although Jack was in his 60s, years of farm work had kept him strong, and he stood eye to eye with Brad. "Now I've got business to attend to. Excuse us." Brad didn't move, blocking their path to the store entrance. His two friends flanked him, arms crossed, sneers firmly in place. Jack recognized them as Scott Mercer and Dave Hoffman, both from families with money and influence in Riverdale. Neither had ever worked a day of real labor in their lives, as far as Jack knew. "Town's got standards, Jack," Brad said, his voice carrying so passers-by could hear. "We don't need homeless people bringing down property values or causing trouble. Sheriff agrees with me on that." Several townspeople had slowed their pace watching the confrontation unfold. Jack noted with disappointment that none stepped forward, though a few looked uncomfortable. "Funny thing about standards," Jack replied, his patience wearing thin. "My daddy taught me that how you treat those less fortunate than yourself shows your true character. What would your grandfather say about how you're acting right now, Brad?" The mention of his grandfather made Brad's face flush with anger. Old Man Thompson had been a decorated World War II veteran and a respected figure in Riverdale, known for his fairness and generosity despite his wealth. "Don't you talk about my grandfather," Brad snapped. "Times have changed. These people bring drugs, crime." "These people?" Jack interrupted, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "This man served our country for 20 years. What have you done besides inherit your grandfather's business and squander his good reputation?" Brad took a threatening step forward, hands clenching into fists. Michael instantly moved beside Jack, his posture shifting subtly into a defensive stance, ready, but not aggressive. "Everything all right out here?" The new voice belonged to Pete Garner, the owner of the small diner across the street. Pete was in his 70s, a Korean War veteran with a slight limp and no patience for nonsense. He crossed the street with surprising speed, coming to stand beside Jack and Michael. "Just having a discussion about community standards, Pete," Brad said, his tone suddenly more measured. Pete's eyes narrowed as he looked at Michael, then back at Brad. "Seems to me like you're harassing a fellow veteran, Brad. That right?" "We don't know he's actually—" Scott began, but Pete cut him off. "I know a military man when I see one," Pete said firmly, "and I know a bully when I see one too." The arrival of Pete had changed the dynamic. More townspeople had gathered, and the public confrontation was no longer working in Brad's favor. After a tense moment, he stepped aside. "Whatever. Do what you want, Jack, but don't come complaining when things go missing from your farm." The threat was thinly veiled as Brad and his friends walked toward his Escalade. "Thanks, Pete," Jack said as they entered the hardware store. "Those boys need a lesson in respect," Pete muttered, then turned to Michael. "Pete Garner, Marine Corps, 51 to 54. Michael straightened almost imperceptibly. "Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves, sir, 1991 to 2011. Pete nodded with approval. "Stop by the diner when you're done here. Coffee's on the house for any Marine." Inside the store, Jack was greeted warmly by the clerk, Susan Jenkins, who'd gone to school with Jack's daughter. "Morning, Mr. Wilson," she said, then glanced curiously at Michael. "Morning, Susan. This is Michael. He's helping me with some fence repair. Need some new fence posts and about 100 feet of wire." As Susan gathered their supplies, Jack noticed Michael examining the store's bulletin board, which was covered with job listings, community announcements, and local news clippings. "Anything interesting?" Jack asked, joining him. Michael pointed to a flyer. "Town's having some kind of fall festival next weekend." "Harvest Festival," Jack confirmed. "Big deal around here. Whole town turns out for it. Carnival rides for the kids, produce competitions, craft booths, the works. Looks like they need security," Michael observed, pointing to a notice seeking temporary help. Jack frowned. "That's new. Never needed security before." He read the posting more carefully. "Says here to contact Brad Thompson for details." "Explains a lot," Michael said quietly. Their supplies paid for, they headed back to the truck. Jack could feel eyes on them as they walked down Main Street, some curious, some disapproving. Riverdale had always been a conservative town, resistant to change or outsiders, but in recent years the atmosphere had grown more hostile, more divided. Jack didn't like it one bit. "Sorry about all that," Jack said as they drove back toward his farm. "Town's changed. Not everyone's like Brad and his crowd, but too many good folks stay quiet these days." Michael stared out the window, watching the neat rows of suburban homes give way to open farmland. "I've seen worse. At least no one pulled a gun." The casual way he said it made Jack glance over sharply. "That happen often?" "Often enough," Michael replied, his voice deliberately neutral. "Some places the homeless are treated like vermin. Move along, don't let anyone see you, don't expect help. Veterans sometimes get a thank you for your service before being told to get lost." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. "How long you been on the road?" Jack asked. Michael was quiet for so long that Jack thought he might not answer. Finally he said, 3 years, give or take. Had a place in Charlotte for a while after I got out. Then the nightmares got bad. Lost my job, then my apartment. Been moving ever since." Jack nodded, not pressing for details. He knew from his brother and son that some experiences couldn't be put into words, and some questions shouldn't be asked. Back at the farm, Jack led Michael to the north pasture where several fence posts had rotted through, allowing sections of wire to sag dangerously close to the ground. "Got 15 head of cattle," Jack explained. "Nothing too ambitious, but enough to supplement the crop income. Can't have them wandering onto the highway." They worked well together, falling into an easy rhythm. Michael was methodical and thorough, his movements economical. Despite the tremor in his left hand, he was strong and skilled with tools. By mid-afternoon, they'd replaced 3 posts and were well on their way to restoring the fence line. During a water break, Jack studied his new helper. The physical labor seemed to have done Michael good. Some of the tension had left his shoulders and his eyes looked clearer. "You said you were a mechanic in the Corps?" Jack asked. Michael nodded. "Started with basic vehicle maintenance, worked my way up to aircraft eventually. Could take apart and reassemble just about anything with an engine." "Got an old tractor that's been giving me fits," Jack said. "If you're interested in taking a look after we finish this fence work." The offer hung in the air between them. Both men understood what Jack was really saying, that there could be more work, a reason for Michael to stay longer. "I'd be happy to," Michael finally said, "though I should warn you it's been a while since I worked on farm equipment." "Seems to me some skills you don't forget," Jack replied. Like riding a bike or field stripping a rifle. A faint smile crossed Michael's face. True enough. As the afternoon wore on, Jack found himself talking more than usual, telling Michael about the farm, his late wife Sarah, their daughter Rachel, who lived in Cincinnati with her husband and 2 kids. Michael didn't share much in return, but he listened attentively, asking good questions that showed he was genuinely interested. By the time they finished for the day, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Jack's body ached from the unaccustomed labor, but it was a good ache, the kind that promised sound sleep. Not bad for a day's work, Jack said, surveying the repaired section of fence. You did good, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity, Michael replied formally, then added more softly, It feels good to build something instead of... He trailed off, but Jack understood. To build instead of destroy, to create instead of survive. Let's head back, Jack said. Got some stew simmering in the slow cooker. As they walked toward the house, the lights glowing warmly in the gathering dusk, Jack wondered about the decision he'd made that morning. Taking in a stranger wasn't something he'd ever done before, and certainly not one with as many obvious troubles as Michael. But something about the man's quiet dignity, his clear efforts to maintain his pride despite his circumstances, resonated with Jack. His brother would have done the same, Jack thought, and he hoped, if his son ever found himself in Michael's position, someone would extend a hand to him too. The stew was simple fare, beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions slow-cooked to tenderness. But Michael ate like it was a gourmet meal, savoring each bite. They sat at Jack's kitchen table, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional creak of the old farmhouse settling. Best meal I've had in years, Michael said quietly when he'd finished, a hint of color in his cheeks. Thank you. Jack waved off the thanks. Sarah was the real cook in the family. I just follow her recipes the best I can. You were married a long time, Michael asked, then immediately looked like he regretted the personal question. Jack nodded, finding he didn't mind. 42 years, high school sweethearts. Lost her to cancer 3 years ago. He glanced at Michael. You? Never married, Michael replied, his gaze dropping to his empty bowl. Came close once before my 3rd deployment. She decided she couldn't handle the military life. There was more to that story, Jack sensed, but he didn't press. Instead, he rose and filled their coffee mugs, then gathered the dishes and moved to the sink. You have children? Michael asked, joining Jack at the sink and picking up a dish towel without being asked. One daughter, Rachel, lives in Cincinnati with her husband and their 2 kids. She's a teacher, middle school science. Pride warmed Jack's voice. She wanted me to sell the farm after Sarah passed, move closer to them. But this land's been in my family for 4 generations. Can't imagine being anywhere else. Michael nodded his understanding, methodically drying each dish and placing it in the cabinet where he'd seen Jack take them from earlier. The domestic routine seemed to calm him, his movements becoming more fluid, less guarded. You said earlier that your son served in Afghanistan? Michael asked after a while. 2 tours, Jack confirmed. Army, 10th Mountain Division. He's in Colorado now, works as a wilderness guide, taking veterans on therapeutic hiking trips. That's good work, Michael said, something like longing in his voice. Nature helps. The quiet. The space. They finished the dishes in companionable silence. Jack found himself appreciating Michael's presence. The house had been too quiet since Sarah died, the evenings especially long. Bathroom's down the hall if you want to clean up, Jack said. Spare room's the first door on the right. Should be clean towels in the closet. Michael hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the hospitality. I can sleep in the barn. Don't want to impose. Nonsense, Jack said firmly. Got a perfectly good bed sitting empty. Would be an insult to Sarah's memory, not to offer it to a guest. Something in the way Jack framed it, as a matter of honor rather than charity, seemed to make it easier for Michael to accept. He nodded and retrieved his duffel bag from where he'd left it by the door. "Thank you," he said again, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling behind them. After Michael disappeared down the hallway, Jack settled in his recliner with the day's newspaper, though his mind wasn't on the headlines. He was thinking about the confrontation in town, about Brad Thompson's thinly veiled threat, about the changes in Riverdale that troubled him. He was nearly dozing when a shout from the spare room jolted him awake. Jack was on his feet instantly, moving down the hallway with surprising speed for a man his age. The door to the spare room was ajar. Inside, Michael was thrashing on the bed, still fully dressed except for his boots, clearly in the grip of a nightmare. "No, get down, incoming!" Michael's voice was commanding even in sleep, the voice of a man used to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. Jack approached cautiously, knowing better than to touch or startle him. "Michael," he called, keeping his distance. "Michael, you're safe. You're at Jack's farm in Riverdale. You're safe." It took several repetitions before Michael's eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. He sat bolt upright, breath coming in harsh gasps, scanning the room as if expecting an attack. "It's just me, Jack," Jack said calmly. "You were having a nightmare. You're safe." Recognition slowly dawned in Michael's eyes, followed by embarrassment and then shame. "I'm sorry," he said, voice hoarse. Was I loud?" "Not at all," Jack lied smoothly. "I was just passing by. Happens to the best of us." Michael ran a shaking hand over his face. "Thought I was past the worst of them." "My brother had them for years," Jack said, carefully taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "Said they'd come in cycles. Better for months, then something would trigger them." Michael nodded, still struggling to fully return to the present. "Being in a real bed sometimes does it. Too soft, too quiet. Sounds crazy, I know." "Not crazy at all," Jack assured him. "My son was the same when he first came home. Slept in a sleeping bag on his bedroom floor for almost a year." The shared understanding seemed to help Michael regain his composure. His breathing steadied, though the tremor in his left hand was more pronounced. "Think you can get back to sleep?" Jack asked. Michael shook his head. "Not right away. He hesitated. "I usually walk. Clear my head." "Well, there's plenty of space for walking around here," Jack said, standing. "But if you'd rather stay inside, I was about to make some tea. Sarah always said chamomile helped with sleep." "Tea sounds good," Michael said after a moment, clearly relieved not to be alone with his thoughts. They moved to the kitchen, where Jack busied himself with the kettle and mugs, giving Michael time to collect himself. Outside, a nearly full moon bathed the farm in silver light, making the fields and outbuildings visible as shadowy outlines. "Beautiful land," Michael observed, looking out the window. "Been Wilson land since 1891, Jack said. "My great-grandfather started with 50 acres, built it up to the 200 we have now. Not the biggest operation around, but it's enough." As they sipped their tea, Jack decided to broach the subject that had been on his mind. "I meant what I said about the tractor. Could use help with it, and there's other work if you're interested in staying on a bit longer." Michael looked up, surprise evident in his face. "You'd want me to stay? After—" He gestured vaguely toward the bedroom, referring to the nightmare. "Because of that, partly," Jack said honestly. "Man who's seen what you have deserves better than sleeping rough and being run off by the likes of Bradley Thompson." He paused. "Besides, I could use the help. Not as young as I used to be." Michael seemed to struggle with himself, pride warring with need, suspicion with hope. "I can't accept charity," he finally said. "And I'm not offering any," Jack replied firmly. "Fair day's work for fair day's pay. Got a harvest coming up in a few weeks that I usually hire temp workers for. Could use a reliable hand before then, too, getting equipment ready, fixing what needs fixing, room and board plus wages. He named a figure that was generous but not suspiciously so. Michael stared into his tea, considering. Why would you do this for a stranger? Jack thought about the question, wanting to give an honest answer. Maybe because my brother came back from Nam and struggled until someone gave him a chance. Maybe because I'd hoped someone would do the same for my son if he needed it. He paused. Or maybe I'm just a selfish old man who doesn't like eating alone every night. That earned him a small smile from Michael. I'd be glad to help with your harvest, Mr. Wilson. Jack corrected. Mr. Wilson was my father. Jack, Michael agreed, extending his hand. They shook on it, a simple gesture that felt significant to both men. The next morning they were up at dawn, Jack moving through his morning routine while Michael helped with the farm chores. The Marine's presence was unobtrusive, but effective, quickly learning the rhythms of farm life and anticipating needs before Jack had to voice them. After breakfast, Jack mentioned needing to go into town again for some groceries and mail. You're welcome to come along, he offered, watching Michael carefully. Michael hesitated, clearly remembering yesterday's confrontation. Then his jaw set in determination. I'll come. Those errands will go faster with 2 sets of hands. As they drove toward town, Jack could sense Michael bracing himself, shoulders squaring, jaw tightening. The same stance he'd seen his son take before facing something difficult. Not quite battle-ready, but prepared for conflict. Thought we might stop by Pete's Diner for lunch, Jack suggested casually. Best apple pie in 3 counties. Michael nodded, a hint of a smile softening his expression. He seemed like a good man. Salt of the earth, Jack agreed, and not the only decent person in Riverdale, despite what yesterday might have suggested. As they approached the town limits, neither man could have anticipated just how significant their simple lunch stop would prove to be, or how dramatically it would change both their lives. Pete's Diner sat at the corner of Main Street and Elm, a classic small-town establishment with large windows, red vinyl booths, and a counter with spinning stools. A bell chimed cheerfully as Jack and Michael entered, drawing the attention of the handful of patrons scattered throughout the cozy space. Pete himself stood behind the counter, gray hair neatly combed, wearing a white apron over a plaid shirt. His face brightened when he spotted them. Jack Wilson, twice in 2 days? Must be some kind of record, Pete called out good-naturedly. His eyes shifted to Michael, warm and welcoming. And Staff Sergeant Reeves, glad you took me up on that coffee offer. Hard to turn down free coffee, Michael replied with a small smile, visibly relaxing at the friendly greeting. Take any booth you like, Pete said, gesturing to the half-empty diner. Lunchtime rush doesn't start for another hour. Jack nodded to a few familiar faces as they made their way to a booth by the window. Some nodded back, while others quickly averted their gaze, particularly when their eyes fell on Michael. Jack pretended not to notice, but he could feel Michael stiffening beside him. Don't mind them, Jack said quietly as they settled into their seats. Small town. People notice newcomers. It's not that, Michael replied, keeping his voice low. They're avoiding looking at you, too, because you're with me. Before Jack could respond, a young waitress approached their table. She was perhaps 19 or 20, with a blonde ponytail and a name tag that read Amber. Morning, Mr. Wilson, she said with a genuine smile. Good to see you. Morning, Amber. How's your mom doing? Much better, thanks. That casserole you sent over last week really cheered her up. Jack turned to Michael. Amber's mother broke her hip last month. She teaches at the elementary school. I'm sorry to hear that, Michael said politely. I hope she recovers quickly. Something in his tone, the sincere concern, the formal politeness, seemed to put Amber at ease. She smiled at him. Thank you, she's already talking about getting back to her students. She pulled out her notepad. What can I get you gentlemen today? They ordered burgers and coffee, and Amber promised to bring their drinks right away. Your reputation precedes you, Michael observed after she left. The helpful neighbor. Jack shrugged, a bit embarrassed. Sarah was the one who always knew when someone needed help. I'm just trying to honor her memory. Their coffee arrived quickly, and Michael wrapped his hands around the warm mug, his eyes drifting to the street outside. Jack followed his gaze and spotted Bradley Thompson and his cronies across the street, watching the diner with undisguised interest. Looks like we have an audience, Jack noted. Michael nodded slightly, his posture subtly shifting. Not tense exactly, but alert. They followed us from the grocery store. Black Escalade's been 2 cars behind us since we left. Jack raised an eyebrow, impressed and concerned by Michael's awareness. You noticed that? Hard habit to break, Michael replied, taking a sip of his coffee. Situational awareness. In Fallujah, not paying attention meant someone died. Jack decided to change the subject. Tell me about your time as a mechanic. My tractor's a John Deere 5045E, about 10 years old. Engine's been running rough, especially when I first started up. The shift to a practical topic seemed to help Michael relax again. He asked several knowledgeable questions about the tractor's symptoms, suggesting potential causes with the easy confidence of someone who truly understood machinery. Their conversation was interrupted when the bell above the door chimed again. Jack glanced up to see Sheriff Dan Collins entering the diner. Dan was in his mid-50s, heavy-set with a receding hairline, and 20 years of law enforcement behind him. He'd been a decent enough sheriff in Jack's estimation, if a bit too willing to look the other way when it came to the town's influential families. Dan's eyes scanned the diner, landing on Jack and Michael. After a moment's hesitation, he approached their table. "Morning, Jack," he said, tipping his hat slightly. His gaze shifted to Michael, assessing. "Don't believe we've met. I'm Sheriff Collins." Michael straightened almost imperceptibly. "Michael Reeves, sir." "Michael's helping me with some work around the farm," Jack explained, watching Dan's reaction carefully. "I see," Dan said, his expression neutral. "Just passing through our town, Mr. Reeves?" The question was casual, but the implication was clear. Jack felt a flare of irritation. "Actually, Michael's staying on to help with the harvest," Jack said before Michael could answer. "He's a Marine veteran, 20 years of service." Dan nodded slowly. "That's so. Thank you for your service." The words were perfunctory, his attention already shifting back to Jack. "Heard there was some trouble outside Thompson's Hardware yesterday." "No trouble," Jack replied evenly. "Just a disagreement among gentlemen." Dan's expression suggested he didn't quite believe that. "Brad Thompson seems to think differently. Says you brought a stranger to town who might cause problems." The injustice of this characterization made Jack's temper flare. The only one causing problems was Brad and his buddies, harassing a veteran who served this country while they were busy inheriting their daddy's money. Michael remained silent, his face carefully neutral, but Jack could sense his discomfort at being the subject of this conversation. Dan held up his hands placatingly. "Just doing my job, Jack. Checking things out." "And have you checked out why Brad Thompson suddenly needs private security for the Harvest Festival?" Jack asked pointedly. "Never needed that before." Something flickered across Dan's face. Discomfort, perhaps, or guilt. "Town's growing. Times are changing." "Some things shouldn't change," Jack replied, holding Dan's gaze. "Like respect for those who served, and standing up to bullies." Their burgers arrived, providing a welcome interruption to the tense conversation. Amber set their plates down with a smile that faltered when she noticed the sheriff. "Can I get you anything, Sheriff Collins?" she asked, her voice slightly higher than before. "No thanks, Amber. Just having a word with Jack here." Dan turned back to them. "Enjoy your meal, gentlemen. And Mr. Reeves, welcome to Riverdale. I hope your stay is uneventful." With that parting comment, the sheriff moved to the counter where Pete was watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. Sorry about that, Jack said quietly after Dan was out of earshot. Michael shook his head. Not your fault. I've dealt with plenty of small-town sheriffs. They usually just want to make sure I move on quickly. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the earlier easy conversation replaced by a palpable tension. Jack noticed several patrons glancing their way, then leaning together to whisper. The sheriff's visit had drawn unwanted attention. Pete approached their table, coffee pot in hand. As he refilled their cups, he leaned down slightly. Sheriff's been in Brad Thompson's pocket ever since Brad's father helped finance his re-election campaign, Pete said quietly. Just so you know what you're dealing with. Jack nodded his thanks for both the coffee and the information. Figured as much. Pete straightened up, speaking in a normal volume now. How's that burger, Staff Sergeant? Does it meet Marine Corps standards? The corner of Michael's mouth twitched upward. Best I've had in years, sir. Drop the sir. I worked for a living, Pete replied with a wink, the old military joke breaking some of the tension. As Pete returned to the counter, Jack noticed a man in the corner booth watching them with unusual intensity. Unlike the other patrons, he wasn't whispering or avoiding eye contact. He was a stranger to Jack, perhaps in his early 40s, fit-looking with close-cropped hair and the kind of watchful stillness that reminded Jack of Michael. Don't look now, Jack said quietly, but we've got someone else interested in us. Corner booth. Michael waited a moment, then casually glanced over as if looking for the restroom. When his eyes returned to Jack, there was a new alertness in them. Military, Michael said with certainty. Maybe former, but definitely military. Friend of yours? Jack asked. Michael shook his head, almost imperceptibly. Never seen him before. They finished their meal with renewed awareness of being observed from multiple fronts. Bradley Thompson and his friends outside, the mysterious military man inside, and a sheriff who'd made his position clear. As Jack paid their bill at the counter, Pete leaned forward. You boys be careful, he said quietly. Brad Thompson's been running his mouth about cleaning up the town lately. Got a bunch of like-minded fellows riled up. Appreciate the warning, Jack replied, leaving Pete a generous tip. But I've never been one to back down from bullies, and I'm too old to start now. Pete's weathered face creased in a smile. That's why I've always liked you, Jack Wilson. Stubborn as they come. As they left the diner, Jack noticed the stranger from the corner booth watching them through the window. Outside, Bradley Thompson's Escalade was still parked across the street, though Brad and his friends were nowhere in sight. Feels like the calm before a storm, Michael observed as they climbed into Jack's truck. Jack couldn't help but agree. Something was brewing in Riverdale, and somehow he and Michael had landed right in the middle of it. The drive back to the farm was quiet, both men lost in their thoughts. Jack kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Bradley's black Escalade following them, but the road behind them remained clear. Would you mind if we stopped at the hardware store on the way back? Michael asked suddenly. I've been thinking about your tractor. Might be a fuel filter issue. Jack nodded, impressed by Michael's focus on the practical task, despite the morning's tension. Good idea. Susan will help us find what we need. The hardware store was mercifully free of Bradley and his cronies when they arrived. Susan greeted them warmly, and Michael quickly found the parts he suspected might solve the tractor problems. His knowledge was evident as he discussed fuel systems and engine components with a level of detail that had Susan looking at him with newfound respect. You really know your stuff, she commented as she rang up their purchases. Just experience, Michael replied modestly. Michael was a mechanic in the Marines, Jack explained, a hint of pride in his voice, though he'd known the man for barely 24 hours. Aircraft engines, mainly. Susan smiled. My brother's Air Force, works on the big cargo planes. Says he can't even change the oil in his own car, though. The casual conversation about military service, free from the tension that had characterized their diner visit, seemed to ease something in Michael. By the time they left the store, his shoulders had lost some of their rigidity. Back at the farm, Michael wasted no time getting to work on the tractor. Jack watched with appreciation as the Marine methodically assessed the machine, his hands steady and sure as they moved through the engine components. Despite the tremor that occasionally affected his left hand, Michael's technical skill was impressive. "What do you think?" Jack asked, handing Michael a wrench when he reached for it. "Definitely a fuel delivery problem," Michael confirmed. "Filter's clogged worse than I expected, and there's some corrosion on the fuel line. Shouldn't be too difficult to fix." They worked together through the afternoon, the tractor gradually coming back to life under Michael's skilled hands. Jack found himself talking more than usual, sharing stories about the farm, his family, and the town. "Riverdale wasn't always like this," Jack said as they cleaned up their tools. "Used to be a good place, tight-knit, sure, and not always welcoming to outsiders, but decent at its core." "What changed?" Michael asked. Jack considered the question. "A lot of things. Economy took a hit when the textile mill closed 10 years back. Young people started leaving for better opportunities. Then the opioid crisis hit hard, like it did everywhere." He paused. "And I suppose some of the old guard dying off changed things too. Men like Brad's grandfather kept the worst impulses in check. And now men like Brad have the run of the place," Michael observed. "Pretty much," Jack agreed. "Folks like me, Pete, we're the old Riverdale. Brad and his crowd, they're the new. And they've decided certain people don't belong here." Michael nodded, understanding all too well. "It's the same in a lot of small towns I've passed through. Economic anxiety turns to fear, fear turns to anger, and they need someone to blame." "And a homeless veteran makes an easy target," Jack finished, disgusted by the truth of it. They finished cleaning up in companionable silence, then headed to the house as evening approached. The tractor repair had taken the better part of the afternoon, but the machine was running smoothly now, purring like it hadn't in years. "I can't thank you enough for that," Jack said as they washed up for dinner. "Would have cost me a pretty penny at the shop in Carter County." "Happy to help," Michael replied, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Feels good to use those skills again." Over a simple dinner of pot roast, another of Sarah's recipes that Jack had mastered, their conversation turned to the mysterious man from the diner. "Military, definitely," Michael said. The way he held himself, the way he assessed the room, the haircut. "Special operations, I'd guess, though I couldn't tell you which branch." "Friend or foe?" Jack asked. Michael considered. "Not sure. He wasn't with Brad's crowd, that's certain. But he was definitely interested in us. Or more likely in me." "Think he recognized you?" Michael shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. But he recognized something about me, same as I did him. It's like recognizing another predator in the wild." He seemed to regret the analogy immediately. "Sorry, that came out wrong." "No need to apologize," Jack assured him. "My son says something similar. Says he can spot another combat vet across a crowded room, just by the way they move, where they choose to sit." "It's true," Michael confirmed. "You develop instincts. They keep you alive over there, and they don't just shut off when you come home." Jack hesitated, then decided to ask the question that had been on his mind. "Your unit see heavy combat?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, and Jack thought he might have overstepped. But then, the Marine nodded, his eyes focused on something far away. "Too much," he said simply. "I was attached to various infantry units as a mechanic at first. But later, I got pulled into some joint operations, special task forces. Can't talk much about it." The simple statement contained volumes, and Jack didn't press. Instead, he shared some of his son's experiences, the sanitized versions that had been deemed safe for family consumption. Michael listened intently, occasionally nodding in recognition or asking a question that revealed his deep understanding of military operations. They were clearing the dinner dishes when headlights swept across the kitchen window. Jack tensed, immediately alert. It was fully dark now, past 8 o'clock, too late for casual visitors. "Expecting someone?" Michael asked, already moving to a position where he could see the driveway without being seen. "No," Jack replied, reaching for the shotgun he kept mounted above the kitchen door. It wasn't loaded, he wasn't that kind of reckless, but the ammunition was in a drawer nearby. The car that pulled up was the sheriff's patrol vehicle. Jack relaxed slightly but didn't put the shotgun back. "It's Collins," he told Michael. "Stay inside if you want. I'll handle this." Michael shook his head. "I'll come with you. Better to know what we're dealing with." They stepped onto the front porch as Sheriff Collins climbed out of his vehicle. He wasn't alone. A deputy Jack didn't recognize remained in the passenger seat. "Evening, Jack," Collins called, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Need a word?" "Kind of late for social calls, Dan," Jack replied, keeping his tone even despite the shotgun in his hands. Collins's eyes flicked to the weapon, then back to Jack's face. "Got a complaint about a stolen vehicle. Dark blue Ford F-150, about 10 years old. Reported missing from the Carter County line 3 days ago. Thought I saw something similar in your barn when I drove by earlier." Jack felt a surge of anger. This was a transparent pretext, obviously orchestrated by Brad Thompson. "You know damn well I've never stolen anything in my life, Dan, and I don't appreciate the implication." "Just doing my job," Collins replied, his tone hardening. "Mind if I take a look in your barn?" "Actually, I do mind," Jack said firmly. "Not without a warrant." The sheriff's expression darkened. "Don't make this difficult, Jack. I'm trying to give you a professional courtesy here." "The professional courtesy would be respecting my rights," Jack countered. "You want to search my property, come back with a warrant." Collins's gaze shifted to Michael, who stood silently beside Jack. "Your new friend seems to be bringing you nothing but trouble, Jack. First the altercation in town, now this. Makes a man wonder." "There is no stolen truck in my barn," Jack stated flatly, "and Michael has nothing to do with any of this. This is Brad Thompson trying to cause problems, and you know it." The sheriff studied them for a long moment, then sighed. "Have it your way, Jack. But this isn't going to just blow over. Brad's got influence in this town, more than you might realize." "Threatening a law-abiding citizen and a war veteran," Jack said, disgust evident in his voice. "Your badge used to mean something better than that, Dan." Without another word, the sheriff returned to his vehicle and drove away, gravel crunching under the tires. Jack watched until the taillights disappeared down the long driveway. "That won't be the end of it," he said grimly. "No," Michael agreed. "It's just the beginning." They returned to the kitchen, the evening's peaceful mood shattered. Jack loaded the shotgun now and propped it in the corner within easy reach. "I should leave," Michael said suddenly. "This is my fault. They're targeting you because of me." "You'll do no such thing," Jack replied, his voice brooking no argument. "They were looking for an excuse. If it wasn't you, it would have been something else." He paused, meeting Michael's troubled gaze. "I don't back down from bullies, son. Never have, never will." The "son" slipped out unintentionally, but Jack didn't retract it. Michael looked startled for a moment, then nodded, a new resolve settling over his features. "Then we face them together," he said quietly. Dawn broke over the farm with an unusual tension in the air. Jack had slept poorly, waking at every sound, the loaded shotgun never far from reach. Michael, he suspected, had barely slept at all. When Jack came downstairs at 4:30, he found the Marine sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in his hands, staring out the window at the gradually lightening sky. "Been up long?" Jack asked, pouring his own coffee. "A while," Michael replied, his voice indicating that a while likely meant most of the night. "Checked the perimeter a few times. Everything's quiet." Jack nodded, not commenting on the military terminology, or the fact that Michael had apparently been patrolling the farm like a sentry. Instead, he set about making breakfast, the familiar routine of cracking eggs and frying bacon, bringing a small sense of normalcy to the morning. "Got a call to make after breakfast," Jack said as they ate. "My son. Figure he should know what's going on." Michael looked up from his plate. "You think it'll come to that?" "Don't know," Jack admitted, "but better to be prepared. Matt's got connections from his time in the service. Might have some advice at least." They finished breakfast and tackled the morning chores together. The routine farm work, feeding the cattle, checking fences, maintaining equipment, felt reassuringly ordinary, despite the undercurrent of tension. Michael moved through the tasks with quiet efficiency, asking the right questions and adapting quickly. Mid-morning, Jack called his son from the landline in the kitchen, putting the call on speaker so Michael could hear. Matt Wilson answered on the third ring, his voice warm despite the distance. "Dad, good to hear from you. Everything okay at the farm?" "Farm's fine," Jack replied, "but we've got a situation developing here that I wanted to run by you." He explained everything, finding Michael, the confrontation with Brad Thompson, the sheriff's late-night visit. Matt listened without interrupting, though Jack could hear his son's breathing changing, growing more controlled, the way it did when he was concerned, but trying not to show it. "So that's where we stand," Jack concluded. "Not sure if it'll blow over or escalate, but thought you should know." There was a pause before Matt responded. "This Thompson character sounds like bad news, and the sheriff being in his pocket complicates things." Another pause. "Can you put Michael on?" Jack gestured to Michael, who leaned closer to the phone. "This is Michael." "Hey, Michael, Matt Wilson. First, welcome home and thank you for your service." The words were spoken with genuine respect, not the perfunctory tone the sheriff had used. "Second, can you tell me a bit more about your background? Just the general outlines, no classified stuff, obviously." Michael glanced at Jack, who nodded encouragingly. 20 years Marines, Sergeant E5 when I got out, Michael said. "Started as a mechanic, but got pulled into some joint task force operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Worked with various units, including Army, Air Force, and," he hesitated, "some Navy Special Operations teams." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "SEALs?" Matt asked. "Among others," Michael confirmed. "Can't go into details." "Understood," Matt said quickly. "One more question. That guy in the diner you mentioned, the one who seemed military. Any chance you got a good look at him? Could describe him?" Michael frowned in concentration. "Caucasian, early 40s, about 6 feet, fit build. Dark hair, very short, almost a high and tight but not quite. No visible tattoos or scars that I could see. Moved like special ops. Carried himself like someone used to being in charge. Anything distinctive? Jewelry, watches, clothing?" Michael thought for a moment. "He wore a black digital watch, looked tactical. And there was a ring, I think. Right hand, gold or brass." The line went quiet for a few seconds. When Matt spoke again, his voice had a new urgency. "Dad, can you put me on speaker?" "Already are," Jack replied. "Good. Listen, both of you. I think I might know what's happening, but I need to make some calls to confirm. Michael, there's a chance you were recognized, not by name but by association. The kind of joint operations you mentioned, they create networks, connections." "What are you saying?" Jack asked. "I'm saying that the guy in the diner might be part of that network. And if he is, and if he recognized Michael as someone who worked with his community..." Matt trailed off. "Look, just sit tight. Don't engage with Thompson or the sheriff unless you absolutely have to. I'll call you back as soon as I know more." After extracting a promise from Jack to be careful, Matt ended the call. Jack and Michael exchanged glances, both processing this new information. "Your son sounds like he knows what he's talking about," Michael observed. Jack nodded. a touch of pride in his expression. Always was sharp as a tack. Got recruited for some pretty specialized units himself, though he doesn't talk much about it. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. They worked on reinforcing a sagging section of the barn roof, the physical labor a welcome distraction from the waiting. Jack found himself studying Michael with new interest, wondering about the operations he'd been involved in, the things he'd seen and done that had left him with nightmares and a trembling hand. Late afternoon, they drove back into town to mail some bills and pick up a few more groceries. The trip was completed quickly, both men alert for any sign of Brad Thompson or Sheriff Collins, but they encountered neither. Too quiet, Michael muttered as they drove back toward the farm. They're planning something. Jack had the same feeling, a prickling at the back of his neck that reminded him of night patrols during his National Guard days. Matt should be calling back soon. Let's see what he's found out before we worry too much. As they turned onto the long driveway leading to the farmhouse, Michael suddenly tensed. "Stop the truck." Jack immediately complied, trusting Michael's instincts without question. "What is it?" Michael was scanning the driveway intently. "Someone's been here. The gravel's been disturbed in a different pattern from when we left." Jack looked and now saw what Michael had instantly noticed, slight differences in how the gravel lay, tracks that weren't from his truck. "Could be the sheriff came back," Jack suggested, though he knew in his gut it wasn't that. "Not official vehicles," Michael said, studying the tracks with the eye of someone trained to notice such details. "These are from something heavier. Multiple vehicles." He pointed to a particular pattern. "And someone got out here. Walked around." They proceeded cautiously up the driveway. Nothing seemed immediately amiss at the farmhouse, but when they checked the barn, it was clear someone had entered. Nothing appeared to be missing, but tools had been moved, cabinet doors left slightly ajar. "They were looking for something," Jack said grimly. "That stolen truck the sheriff mentioned, I'd bet. Or planning something to find later," Michael added, his experienced gaze sweeping the barn for anything out of place. A thorough search revealed nothing obviously planted or taken, but the violation of Jack's property left both men on edge. They secured the buildings as best they could and returned to the house, where Jack immediately checked for his most valuable possessions, his wife's jewelry, the small amount of cash he kept for emergencies, the rifle passed down from his grandfather. All were untouched. The phone rang just as they finished checking the house. It was Matt, as promised. "Dad, put me on speaker again," he said without preamble. Once Jack had done so, Matt continued. "I've confirmed some things. That man in the diner is almost certainly who I thought. Commander James Elliott, retired Navy SEAL. He's leading a wilderness therapy program for veterans about 40 miles from you." Michael looked stunned. "I thought he seemed familiar. I worked with SEAL Team 3 on a joint operation in 2008. Elliott was one of the officers." "That explains it," Matt said. "Elliott would have recognized you as someone who worked with his community, even if he couldn't place exactly who you were or where you'd met." "But why was he watching us?" Jack asked. "I'm not entirely sure," Matt admitted. "But here's what I do know. The veteran community in that area has been keeping tabs on Brad Thompson for months. Apparently, Thompson and his friends have been systematically driving homeless veterans out of Riverdale and the surrounding counties. There have been incidents, beatings, thefts, vandalism. Nothing that could be definitively tied to Thompson, but the pattern is clear." Jack felt a cold anger settling in his chest. "And the sheriff?" "Turns his blind eye," Matt confirmed. "From what I've heard, Thompson's group fancies themselves some kind of community preservation society. And they target those they see as undesirable. Homeless people, especially veterans who might have visible PTSD or substance issues. That's why they came after me right away," Michael said quietly. "They've got a system." "Exactly," Matt agreed. "And now they see you as a double threat. Not only are you one of the people they want gone, but you found an ally in Dad, a respected community member who isn't afraid to stand up to them. "So what's our next move?" Jack asked. "I've set some things in motion," Matt replied cryptically. "Just stay alert and try to avoid confrontation for the next 24 hours. And if you see Commander Elliott again, approach him. Let him know you're aware of the situation." After ending the call, Jack and Michael sat in silence for a few moments, processing everything they'd learned. "I'm sorry," Michael finally said. "I've brought this trouble to your door." Jack shook his head firmly. "The trouble was already here. Thompson and his crowd have been bullying this town for too long. Sometimes it takes an outsider to make folks see what's right in front of them." As darkness fell, they took turns keeping watch, neither man willing to be caught unprepared again. The night passed quietly, but the calm felt ominous rather than reassuring. The stillness before a storm breaks. Morning brought no answers but a new determination. After completing the essential farm chores, Jack and Michael sat at the kitchen table with coffee, discussing their options. "I can't just sit here waiting for Thompson to make his next move," Jack said, frustration evident in his voice. "This is my home. I've got a right to know what we're facing." Michael nodded, understanding the feeling all too well. "Your son said to avoid confrontation, not information gathering. I think we should go into town, take the temperature of things." "Pete's Diner would be our best bet," Jack agreed. "If anyone knows what's happening in Riverdale, it's Pete." The drive into town was tense, both men scanning for signs of trouble. Riverdale seemed unnaturally quiet for a weekday morning. Main Street had fewer cars than usual, and some shops that should have been open had their closed signs displayed. "Something's definitely up," Jack murmured as they parked near the diner. Pete's establishment was only half full, another anomaly for the popular breakfast spot. The bell chimed as they entered, and Pete looked up from behind the counter, relief washing over his weathered face. "Was hoping you'd stop by," he said, gesturing them toward the counter rather than a booth. "Coffee's fresh." As he poured their cups, Pete leaned in close. "Thompson's been busy. Called a town safety meeting last night at the American Legion Hall. Talked about undesirable elements and taking back our town. Had about 30 people there, including the sheriff." Jack's hand tightened around his coffee mug. "That explains the tension we're feeling." Pete nodded grimly. "That's not all. They're planning something for today. Don't know what exactly, but Brad's buddies have been driving around in packs since dawn, like they're looking for someone." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Michael. Michael remained outwardly calm, but Jack could see the alertness in his eyes, the slight tensing of his shoulders, a combat veteran preparing for trouble. "Any idea when or where?" Michael asked quietly. Pete shook his head. "Just heard them talking about sending a message this afternoon." The bell above the door chimed again, and all three men turned to look. Commander James Elliott entered the diner, his eyes quickly finding Michael and Jack at the counter. Without hesitation, he walked over to join them. "Morning, gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone used to command. "Mind if I join you?" Pete raised an eyebrow but didn't comment as he poured another cup of coffee. "Commander Elliott," Michael acknowledged with a slight nod. "Thought that was you." If Elliott was surprised at being recognized, he didn't show it. "Staff Sergeant Reeves. Took me a while to place you. Fallujah, 2008? "That's right," Michael confirmed. "Joint Task Force Operations." The two men studied each other with the mutual respect of warriors who had shared similar experiences. Jack watched the interaction, fascinated by the unspoken communication happening before him. "Heard you've been having some trouble with the local welcome committee," Elliott said, taking a sip of his coffee. "You could say that," Jack replied. "My son Matt called you?" Elliott nodded. "Lieutenant Wilson and I have crossed paths. He reached out, filled me in on the situation." His eyes shifted to Michael. "Thompson's group has been targeting veterans for months, mostly the vulnerable ones. Homeless, those with visible PTSD. substance issues. They run them out of town, sometimes violently. And you've been watching them, Michael stated rather than asked. We've been documenting, Elliot corrected, building a case to take to the state police or FBI since the local sheriff is compromised. But we need solid evidence of civil rights violations. Jack frowned. And in the meantime, vulnerable veterans keep getting hurt. Elliot's expression hardened slightly. It's not ideal, but taking direct action without legal backing could make things worse. Too late for caution now, Pete interjected, glancing out the window. Trouble's coming. 3 vehicles had just pulled up outside. Brad Thompson's black Escalade flanked by 2 pickup trucks. Brad and at least 6 other men were getting out, all wearing matching navy blue jackets with some kind of emblem on the breast pocket. Community Preservation Society, Elliot explained, noting Jack's questioning look. Thompson's little militia. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, Pete muttered, reaching under the counter. What are you doing? Jack asked. Pete pulled out an old military service pistol. I keep this for emergencies. Figure this qualifies. Put it away, Elliot said firmly. There are civilians in here, and Thompson is looking for any excuse to claim self-defense. Before Pete could respond, the diner door opened, and Brad Thompson strode in, flanked by Scott Mercer and Dave Hoffman. The other men remained outside, positioned strategically around the entrances. Well, isn't this cozy? Brad said, his voice carrying through the now silent diner. The old farmer, the homeless vet, and... His eyes narrowed at Elliot. Who might you be? Just passing through, Elliot replied mildly, though his posture had subtly shifted, ready for action if needed. Brad turned his attention to Jack. You know, Jack, I've been patient, given you every opportunity to see reason. But harboring undesirables, interfering with police business, that crosses a line. The only line being crossed is by you and your thugs, Jack replied, standing to face Brad directly. Despite his age, Jack was still a solidly built man, and he stood eye to eye with the younger Thompson. Harassing veterans, intimidating townspeople, using the sheriff as your personal enforcer. Your grandfather would be ashamed. Brad's face flushed with anger. Don't you dare talk about my grandfather. This town has changed. We're making it safe again, prosperous again. By targeting those who served our country? Michael asked, his voice dangerously calm as he too stood up. That's your idea of community preservation? Brad's gaze shifted to Michael, contempt evident in his expression. You people come back broken, violent, drug-addicted, a drain on society. We're supposed to thank you for your service and then watch while you destroy our communities? The few remaining customers in the diner watched the confrontation with horrified fascination. No one moved to intervene, either out of fear or tacit agreement with Thompson's words. That's enough, Brad, Pete said firmly. This is my establishment, and I'm asking you to leave. Brad ignored him, focusing on Michael. I've got the sheriff ready to arrest you for that stolen truck we found hidden on Wilson's property last night. Or you can leave town now while you still can. The implication was clear. They had planted evidence during their search of Jack's barn. That's fabricated evidence and you know it, Jack said, his voice rising with anger. I don't know what game you're playing, but... No game, old man, Brad interrupted. Just cleaning up the town. He turned to Michael. You've got 1 hour to get on the road, or the sheriff arrests you for grand theft auto. Your choice. Elliot, who had remained seated during the exchange, now stood slowly. You're making a serious mistake, Thompson. Brad finally turned his full attention to Elliot. And who exactly are you to tell me that? Someone who doesn't appreciate seeing veterans harassed, Elliot replied evenly. Someone with resources you might not have considered. Brad laughed, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes as he assessed Elliot more carefully. Another bleeding heart. This town's full of them, but they're learning to keep quiet, and so will you. With that parting comment, Brad signaled to his companions and they backed toward the door. 1 hour, he repeated, pointing at Michael, or you'll be spending a long time in state prison. After they left, the diner remained silent for several seconds. Then Pete let out a long, slow breath. This is beyond intimidation now. That's a criminal conspiracy. Elliot pulled out his phone. I need to make some calls. The timeline just accelerated. He looked at Jack and Michael. Thompson's making his move. We need to make ours. What exactly did Matt set in motion? Jack asked, suspicion growing in his mind. Elliot's expression was unreadable. Let's just say some of my former colleagues were already in the area for a training exercise. They're very interested in civil rights violations against veterans. SEALs? Michael asked quietly. Elliot neither confirmed nor denied, merely saying, We take care of our own. The implications hung in the air as Elliot stepped outside to make his calls. Jack and Michael exchanged glances, both understanding that events were now moving beyond their control, toward a confrontation that would change Riverdale forever. What do we do now? Pete asked, giving voice to what everyone was thinking. Jack's jaw set with determination. We stand our ground. No more running. No more intimidation. Thompson won't back down, Michael warned. Men like that never do unless forced. Then I guess it's time someone did some forcing, Jack replied grimly. Commander Elliot returned to the diner, his expression grim but determined. We've got about 45 minutes before Thompson's deadline. I've set some things in motion, but we need to buy time. What's the plan? Michael asked, the military instinct to defer to a superior officer momentarily taking over. We're not leaving, Jack stated firmly before Elliot could respond. This is my town too, and I'm not being run out of it. Elliot studied Jack with newfound respect. No one's suggesting you should leave, Mr. Wilson, but we need to be smart about this. Thompson's group is organized and has local law enforcement in their pocket. Pete, who had been watching the remaining customers discreetly exit the diner during the confrontation, locked the door behind the last one and flipped the sign to closed. Just us now, he said, rejoining the group. So let's talk straight. What exactly are we dealing with, Commander? Elliot leaned against the counter. Based on our intelligence, Thompson has about 25 core members in his so-called Community Preservation Society. Most are just followers, men looking for someone to blame for their problems. But Thompson and a few others, they're true believers. They've been escalating their tactics for months. Targeting the most vulnerable, Michael added, his voice tight with controlled anger. Exactly, Elliot confirmed. At first it was just intimidation, making it clear certain people weren't welcome. Then it escalated to vandalism, destruction of property, physical threats. We've documented at least 7 cases of homeless veterans being assaulted, though most were too afraid to file formal charges. Jack felt his blood boil at the thought. And the sheriff did nothing? Worse than nothing, Pete interjected. Dan Collins has been actively helping them, using his authority to harass anyone Thompson targets. Michael remained silent, but his eyes had taken on the distant look that Jack had come to recognize, the look of a man revisiting painful memories. You've seen this before, Jack said quietly to him. Michael nodded slowly. More times than I can count. Different countries, different uniforms, but the tactics are always the same. Identify a vulnerable group, dehumanize them, then use force to remove them. It starts small, then escalates until... He didn't finish the thought. That's why we've been building a case, Elliot explained. This isn't just about bullying anymore. It's a coordinated campaign of civil rights violations. And now they've escalated to planting evidence, Jack pointed out. That stolen truck they claim to have found on my property. Elliot's phone buzzed with a message. He checked it, then looked up with a slight smile. My colleagues are in position, but we need to draw Thompson and his core group together, get them to reveal their true intentions. You want to use us as bait, Michael stated flatly. I want to give Thompson enough rope to hang himself, Elliot corrected. Legally speaking. Jack considered this. The deadline he gave Michael. That's our leverage. Elliot nodded approvingly. Exactly. Thompson expects one of two things to happen. Either Michael leaves town or the sheriff arrives to arrest him on false charges. Either way, Thompson wins. But what if neither happens? Pete suggested, catching on to the plan. What if the deadline passes and we're all still here? Thompson will have to respond, Michael concluded. He's staked too much of his authority on this ultimatum. And when he does, Elliot continued, we'll have witnesses, multiple witnesses, with indisputable evidence of civil rights violations against a veteran. Jack didn't miss the implication. Your SEAL friends. Elliot's expression remained neutral. I never said anything about SEALs, Mr. Wilson. You didn't have to, Michael said with the ghost of a smile. But this is risky. Thompson and his people could get violent. They could, Elliot acknowledged. But the more aggressive they get, the stronger our case becomes. And trust me, my colleagues are very good at handling themselves in tense situations. Jack found himself studying Elliot more carefully. The commander had the quiet confidence of a man who had faced far worse dangers than Brad Thompson's ragtag militia. What do you need us to do? Jack asked, making his decision. Just stay here, Elliot replied. When Thompson's deadline passes, he'll either send the sheriff or come himself. Either way, we'll be ready. Pete moved behind the counter. I'm reopening. If we're going to make a stand, might as well do it right. Coffee's on the house. As Pete flipped the sign back to open, Michael pulled Jack aside. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. This isn't your fight. Jack looked at the Marine, seeing not just the homeless veteran he'd found by the oak tree, but a man of honor who had served his country and been cast aside. It became my fight the moment Thompson decided to plant evidence on my property. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I told you I don't back down from bullies. The next 30 minutes passed in tense expectation. A few regular customers came into the diner, sensing something unusual but drawn by curiosity. Elliot made more quiet phone calls from a corner booth, while Michael positioned himself with a clear view of both entrances, an unconscious, tactical decision that spoke to his training. Jack found himself remembering other moments of waiting, sitting with Sarah in the hospital as they awaited test results, standing by the phone when Matt was deployed overseas, watching the weather before deciding if a crop was ready for harvest. Life was full of such moments, suspended between decision and consequence. At precisely 1 hour after Thompson's ultimatum, Sheriff Collins's patrol car pulled up outside the diner. The sheriff entered alone, his expression grim but determined. His hand rested on his holster as he surveyed the diner, taking note of Jack, Michael, Pete, and Elliot. Michael Reeves, Collins said formally. I have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of grand theft auto. Please stand and place your hands behind your back. Michael remained seated. That's a false charge, Sheriff, based on fabricated evidence. Collins's jaw tightened. Don't make this difficult, son. I'm just doing my job. Are you? Jack challenged, standing up. Or are you doing Brad Thompson's bidding? Several customers were now watching openly, phones discreetly recording the confrontation. Jack noticed Elliot making a subtle hand gesture through the window, apparently signaling to someone outside. This doesn't concern you, Jack, Collins warned. Step aside. It absolutely concerns me, Jack replied. You claim to have found a stolen vehicle on my property. Property you searched without a warrant, I might add. That makes me involved. Collins looked increasingly uncomfortable as more eyes turned toward him. I have a valid warrant now signed by Judge Parker. The same Judge Parker who plays golf with Brad Thompson every Sunday? Pete called from behind the counter. Convenient. The sheriff's face flushed with anger. That's enough. Mr. Reeves, you're under arrest. The rest of you are interfering with a police officer in the performance of his duties. Grounds for arrest if you persist." Elliot chose that moment to speak up. "Before you proceed, Sheriff, you should know that this entire interaction is being recorded and transmitted live to the State Police Headquarters in Richmond, as well as to several federal agencies with an interest in civil rights violations against veterans." Collins turned to Elliot, seeing him clearly for the first time. "Who the hell are you?" "Commander James Elliot, United States Navy, retired," Elliot replied calmly. "Currently an advisor to the Veterans Justice Initiative, a non-profit organization that documents and litigates civil rights abuses against former military personnel." The sheriff's confident demeanor faltered slightly. "This is a local police matter." "It became a federal matter," Elliot interrupted, "when you and Brad Thompson began a systematic campaign of harassment against veterans, culminating in false arrests based on planted evidence." Collins's hand tightened on his holster. "You have no proof of any—" The diner door opened again, and Brad Thompson strode in, flanked by Scott and Dave. "What's the holdup, Sheriff? I thought I was clear about the deadline." The timing couldn't have been worse for Collins, who visibly winced at Thompson's entrance. The connection between them was now explicitly revealed to everyone watching. "I'm handling it, Brad," Collins muttered. "Just give me a minute." But Thompson was focused on Michael, who remained calmly seated. "Time's up, homeless guy. Looks like you chose prison." "There won't be any arrest today," Elliot stated. "Not unless you want to add civil rights violations to the conspiracy and evidence tampering charges already being compiled." Thompson finally gave Elliot his full attention. "I don't know who you think you are, but this town handles its own business." "Is that what you call it?" Jack asked, stepping forward. "Planting evidence? Running people out of town because they don't fit your idea of desirable? Threatening and intimidating those who stand up to you?" Thompson's face darkened with rage. "You're making a big mistake, old man. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," Elliot said, his voice carrying easily through the now silent diner, "I believe it's you who doesn't understand the situation." He gestured toward the window. "Perhaps you should take a look outside." Collins turned first, his law enforcement instincts kicking in despite his corrupt allegiance. What he saw made his face drain of color. Outside Pete's diner, the street had been transformed. At least a dozen men in civilian clothes had positioned themselves at strategic points around the building. They wore no uniforms or insignia, but their bearing was unmistakable to anyone with military experience. The balanced stance, the alert awareness, the disciplined stillness. Several had their phones out, obviously recording everything. Brad Thompson turned to look, his expression shifting from confusion to anger, to the first flickers of fear as he realized the implications. "What is this?" he demanded, though his voice had lost some of its former bravado. "These are some colleagues of mine," Elliot explained calmly. "Former Special Operations personnel who take a keen interest in veterans affairs. They've been documenting your activities for some time now." One of the men outside stepped forward, positioning himself directly in front of the diner's main window, where everyone inside could see him clearly. He was tall and powerfully built, with the weathered face of someone who had spent years in harsh environments. He wore a simple dark jacket and jeans, but there was nothing simple about his presence. He nodded once to Elliot, a gesture of silent communication between men accustomed to operating without words. "That's Chief Warrant Officer Ramirez," Elliot continued, "formerly of SEAL Team 6. The gentleman to his left is Master Chief Peterson. Next to him, Lieutenant Commander Garcia." Jack watched as Sheriff Collins's hand slowly dropped away from his holster, the fight visibly draining out of him as he processed what he was facing. These weren't ordinary citizens he could intimidate or arrest. These were elite warriors, men trained in the most advanced combat techniques in the world, now turned watchdogs for their vulnerable comrades. "This is ridiculous," Thompson blustered, though his complexion had paled considerably. You can't just bring in your military buddies to intimidate local law enforcement. That's illegal. Nothing illegal about citizens observing public servants in the performance of their duties, Elliot countered smoothly. Or documenting potential civil rights violations. As private citizens, they're well within their rights. Michael, who had remained seated throughout the confrontation, now stood slowly. His eyes met those of the SEAL called Ramirez through the window, and some unspoken message passed between them. Recognition, respect, solidarity. "What exactly do you want?" Collins asked, his voice now uncertain. "Justice," Elliot replied simply. "An end to the harassment of veterans in Riverdale, and accountability for those who have abused their positions of authority." Thompson laughed, but it sounded hollow and forced. "You've got nothing. A few complaints from homeless bums, no real evidence." "We have everything," Elliot interrupted, his voice hardening for the first time. "Documented patterns of harassment, witness testimonies, video evidence of assaults, financial records showing how you've used your business to pressure other establishments to cooperate with your community preservation agenda." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "And now we have you on record ordering a false arrest based on evidence that you planted." The diner had gone completely silent. Even Pete had stopped wiping the counter, his eyes darting between the confrontation inside and the imposing figures outside. "That's absurd," Thompson said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sheriff, are you going to stand there and let this outsider threaten us?" Collins didn't immediately respond, his law enforcement training finally asserting itself as he reassessed the situation. The odds had shifted dramatically, and not in his favor. "I think," the sheriff said carefully, "that we should continue this discussion down at the station, in a more official capacity." It was a transparent attempt to regain control of the situation, but Elliot was having none of it. "I don't think that will be necessary, Sheriff. State police investigators are already on their way, along with representatives from the FBI's Civil Rights Division. They're very interested in reviewing our evidence." This news visibly shook Collins, who turned to Thompson with accusation in his eyes. "You said this was just about cleaning up the town, Brad. You never mentioned anything about—" "Shut up," Thompson hissed, realizing his ally was about to incriminate them both further. Jack stepped forward, addressing Collins directly. "Dan, you still wear that badge. It used to stand for something in this town. Is this really how you want to be remembered? As Brad Thompson's enforcer?" The question seemed to strike a nerve. Collins looked down at his badge, then at Thompson, then at the SEALs outside. Something in his expression changed, resignation perhaps, or the belated return of his conscience. "I need to make a call to the county prosecutor," Collins said finally. "This situation is more complicated than I was led to believe." "The hell you will," Thompson snarled, grabbing the sheriff's arm. "You work for me, remember? My family built this town." Collins jerked his arm free, his face hardening. "No, Brad. I work for the people of Riverdale. All of them." He turned to Michael. "Mr. Reeves, I'm rescinding the warrant for your arrest pending further investigation. I apologize for the inconvenience." Thompson's face contorted with rage. "You gutless coward. After everything I've done for you, that's enough, Brad," Collins said firmly, his hand returning to his holster with a different purpose now. "Don't make this worse for yourself." Michael, who had remained remarkably composed throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "This isn't just about me, Sheriff. Thompson and his friends have been targeting veterans systematically. Men who served their country, who came home with wounds both visible and invisible, only to be treated like garbage. We have the names and statements of 16 veterans who were run out of Riverdale and surrounding communities in the past 8 months," Elliot added. 3 were physically assaulted. 1, a Marine with PTSD, was beaten so severely he required hospitalization. Jack felt a cold fury building in his chest at these revelations. "Is that true, Dan? Did you know about this?" Collins had the decency to look ashamed. "I heard rumors. Nothing official was ever reported." "Because they were afraid," Michael said quietly. "Afraid of exactly this. A system where those in power protect each other instead of those they're sworn to serve." Outside, more vehicles were arriving. 2 unmarked sedans that Jack guessed contained the state police investigators Elliot had mentioned. The SEALs remained in position, their disciplined presence a silent rebuke to Thompson's blustering intimidation tactics. Thompson, sensing his position crumbling, made one last desperate play. "This is all hearsay. You can't prove I personally did anything wrong. It's my word against a bunch of homeless vets." He pointed accusingly at Michael. "Like this one, a man so broken he can't even hold down a job, probably hopped up on drugs or crazy from PTSD. Who's going to believe him over me?" The calculated cruelty of Thompson's words hung in the air. Jack saw Michael flinch almost imperceptibly, the barbs finding their mark despite his composed exterior. Jack had heard enough. He stepped forward, placing himself between Thompson and Michael. "I believe him. Pete believes him. And I'm guessing those men outside believe him too." "As do I," came a new voice from the diner doorway. Everyone turned to see a woman in her early 40s wearing a state police investigator's badge on her belt. She surveyed the scene with professional detachment before continuing. "Investigator Diana Chen, Virginia State Police. We've been monitoring the situation in Riverdale for some time now." Her eyes fixed on Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, we have quite a lot to discuss." Thompson's face had gone ashen. "I want my lawyer." "That's certainly your right," Chen replied coolly. "You'll have ample opportunity to contact legal counsel after you've been properly processed and charged." "Charged?" Thompson's voice rose in disbelief. "With what?" "For starters, conspiracy to violate civil rights, witness intimidation, filing false police reports, and evidence tampering." Chen listed the charges with calm precision. "The Commonwealth Attorney may add more as our investigation progresses." 2 more state police officers entered the diner, positioning themselves near Thompson and his increasingly nervous associates. The message was clear. This was no longer a confrontation Thompson could bluster his way out of. Sheriff Collins, seemingly eager to distance himself from the sinking ship, stepped away from Thompson. "I'm prepared to cooperate fully with your investigation, Investigator Chen." Chen's expression suggested she was unimpressed by this belated show of integrity, but she nodded acknowledgement. "We'll be speaking with you at length, Sheriff Collins. Your perspective will be valuable." As Thompson and his associates were escorted from the diner to awaiting vehicles, the tension that had filled the small space began to dissipate. Outside, the SEALs maintained their positions, their mission incomplete until they were certain their fellow veteran was safe. "Is it really over?" Jack asked Elliot quietly. The commander's expression was measured. "This part is. Thompson and his core group will face charges. The state police will clean house, including the sheriff's department if necessary. But changing a town's attitude, that takes longer." Jack nodded, understanding all too well. One step at a time. Michael had moved to the window, exchanging silent nods of recognition with several of the SEALs outside. Jack couldn't begin to comprehend the bond that existed between these men, forged in experiences he could barely imagine. "Thank you," Michael said simply when he returned to where Jack and Elliot stood. "Both of you." "Don't thank me yet," Elliot replied with a slight smile. "We've still got work to do." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. State police investigators took over the sheriff's department, setting up temporary headquarters to process evidence and conduct interviews. Thompson and 3 of his core associates remained in custody, denied bail due to witness intimidation concerns. Sheriff Collins had been suspended pending investigation, his deputy appointed as interim sheriff. Word spread quickly through Riverdale. The story grew with each telling: how Navy SEALs had surrounded Pete's diner, how Jack Wilson and a homeless veteran had stood up to Brad Thompson's reign of intimidation, how a conspiracy of harassment and corruption had been operating in plain sight for months. Jack and Michael found themselves at the center of it all, giving statements to investigators and fielding questions from neighbors who suddenly wanted to know the full story. The SEALs had disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, but their impact lingered in the collective consciousness of the town. 4 days after the confrontation at the diner, Jack sat on his front porch with Michael, watching the sunset paint the fields in gold and amber. They had fallen into an easy routine on the farm, working side by side during the day and sharing quiet evenings on the porch afterward. "Got a call from Matt today," Jack said, sipping from a glass of iced tea. "He's proud of us. Says we did good." Michael smiled slightly. He orchestrated most of it, getting Elliot involved, bringing in the SEALs. "Maybe," Jack conceded, "but we were the ones who stood our ground." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional breeze rustling through the trees. "Thompson's father called me," Jack said eventually. "First time we've spoken in years." Michael looked over, surprised. "What did he want?" "To apologize. Said he'd been away in Florida too long, let his son ruin the family name." Jack shook his head. Too little, too late. But at least he had the decency to say it. A car appeared at the far end of the driveway, dust trailing behind it as it approached. Both men tensed slightly, old habits not yet faded. "Expecting anyone?" Michael asked. Jack shook his head, but as the car drew closer, he relaxed. "It's Pete." The old Korean War veteran parked beside Jack's truck and climbed out, carrying a covered dish. "Evening, gentlemen," he called as he approached the porch. "Thought you might appreciate some of Marlene's apple cobbler." "Never been known to turn that down," Jack replied with a smile, gesturing to an empty chair. Pete settled in with a grunt, his bad hip clearly bothering him. "Town's still buzzing. You two are the main topic at the diner." "How are people taking it?" Michael asked. Pete considered the question. "Mixed. Some are shocked, especially about the extent of Thompson's operation. Others are ashamed they didn't speak up sooner. A few are still loyal to Brad, claiming he was just trying to keep the town safe." He snorted derisively. "As if harassing veterans was ever about safety." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Riverdale's got some soul-searching to do." "That it does," Pete agreed. "But there's good news, too. That Veterans Justice group of Elliott's is setting up a local chapter, going to provide support services, legal aid, employment assistance. They're looking for a local liaison, someone who understands both the military experience and the town." Michael looked up sharply. "They've found someone?" Pete grinned. Looking at him, "Elliot asked me to feel you out about it. Said you've got the right background, the right temperament. Plus, after what happened at the diner, you've got credibility." Michael seemed stunned. "I don't know what to say. I haven't exactly been stable. The nightmares, the tremor." "Join the club," Pete said bluntly. "You think any of us came back whole? The point isn't that you're perfect. The point is you understand." Jack watched Michael process this, seeing the conflict in his eyes, the desire to be useful battling against deep-rooted doubts about his own worth. "You'd be good at it," Jack said quietly, "and you'd have a place here, for as long as you want." Michael looked at him in surprise. "You mean that? Farm's too big for one old man anyway," Jack said with a casual shrug that belied the significance of the offer. "Spare room's yours if you want it, or we could fix up the old foreman's cottage if you prefer your own space." The enormity of what was being offered, not just a job or a place to stay, but a home, a purpose, a chance to belong, seemed to overwhelm Michael. He looked away, blinking rapidly. "I don't know what to say," he managed finally. "Say yes," Pete suggested with a smile, "to both offers." Michael took a deep breath. "Yes, thank you." The simple words carried the weight of a man finding solid ground after years adrift. Pete stayed for another hour, sharing updates about the investigation and town gossip. Apparently, Susan from the hardware store had been instrumental in providing investigators with records of unusual purchases by Thompson's group. And Amber, the waitress from the diner, had come forward with recordings of conversations she'd overheard while serving Thompson and his associates. "People are finding their courage," Pete observed as he prepared to leave. "Sometimes it just takes one person standing up to start an avalanche." After Pete drove away, Jack and Michael remained on the porch as twilight deepened into night. The first stars appeared overhead, bright pinpricks against the darkening sky. "Never thought I'd have a place again," Michael said softly. "After everything, I just assumed that part of my life was over." Jack understood. After losing Sarah, he'd felt the same way, that certain doors had closed forever, that some kinds of happiness were no longer available to him. "Life has a way of surprising you," he replied. "Sarah used to say that endings and beginnings are often the same thing, just viewed from different directions." Michael nodded, considering this. "Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman." "The wisest," Jack agreed. "She would have liked you." The simple statement seemed to touch Michael deeply. They sat in companionable silence, watching more stars emerge. "Commander Elliott called earlier," Michael said after a while. "Wanted to check in, make sure I was doing okay after everything." "And are you?" Jack asked. Michael thought about it. "Getting there. The nightmares aren't gone, but they're less frequent." He flexed his left hand, which Jack noticed had been trembling less in recent days. Having purpose helps. A week later, they drove into town together for the community meeting at the town hall. The large room was packed with Riverdale residents, the atmosphere charged with a mixture of tension, curiosity, and determination. Jack spotted familiar faces: Pete near the front, Susan from the hardware store with her family, Amber the waitress, and dozens of others. Some neighbors who had avoided eye contact with Jack only days earlier now nodded in greeting, perhaps ashamed of their earlier silence, perhaps simply relieved that Thompson's influence had been broken. Investigator Chen was there, along with representatives from the state attorney's office and Commander Elliott. They outlined the charges against Thompson and his associates, explained the ongoing investigation into the sheriff's department, and announced the creation of a community oversight committee to help rebuild trust. When Elliott introduced Michael as the new local liaison for the Veterans Justice Initiative, the applause was genuine, if somewhat tentative. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but it had begun. After the meeting, Jack and Michael declined several invitations to join neighbors for coffee or dinner, both feeling the need for quiet after the emotional intensity of the past week. As they drove back toward the farm, Michael asked Jack to stop near the old oak tree where they had first met. "Mind if we pull over for a minute?" he asked. Jack complied, curious but not questioning. They got out of the truck and walked to the massive oak, its branches spreading wide over the boundary between Jack's farm and the main road. Michael stood silently for a moment, looking at the spot where Jack had found him just over a week ago, a lifetime ago in some ways. "I was at my lowest point that morning," Michael finally said. "Nowhere to go, no one who cared if I lived or died. I'd been thinking that maybe—" He trailed off, but Jack understood. "I'm glad you were here," Jack said simply. "Glad I found you." Michael nodded, emotion making it difficult to speak. Finally, he said, "Some people say there are no accidents, that things happen for a reason." Jack thought about that, about finding Michael here, about Matt's connections to Commander Elliott, about the SEALs being nearby for training, about how standing up to one bully had sparked a transformation in Riverdale. "I don't know about fate," Jack replied honestly. "But I do know this. Sometimes the right people find each other at the right time, and that can change everything." As they returned to the truck and continued toward home, Their home now. Jack felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The farm that had felt too empty after Sarah's passing now had new purpose, new life. Riverdale, for all its flaws, was facing its demons and beginning to heal. And two men who had each been broken in their own ways had found, in their unlikely friendship, the strength to make a stand. Not just for themselves, but for all those who couldn't stand alone.